Hello everyone, my name is Lucas and today I had the pleasure of speaking to Merrily Duffy. Merrily Duffy is the host of the Casual Temple podcast. More than that, she is a wonderful person who I get to know today. I get to know her story and she shares it so openly, so beautifully and so vulnerably that we really get to have a sense of who she is, why she is where she is today, what her thoughts are, and amazing concepts such as magic and what she thinks about astrology. And I think we even touched on telepathy, but I'm not sure if I'm mixing up things there. I found this conversation to be mind expanding, to really open up my mind to different ideas, but also my heart. I think that she really provides me with a perspective that I'm not used to as much, but that's exactly the goal of this channel. I want to speak to people who have different life experiences from my own. And yeah, she taught me so many new things, so many things that I want to look into, so many things I want to spend more time on. And I'm really excited to come on her channel too in about a week or two. So without further ado, here is Merrily Duffy.
Thanks, Lucas, for getting connected. Thank you to Jason Schweizer from the
Yeah.
Almond Tree. Awesome person. Um, and yeah, gosh, my story. Let's see. Well, I host the Casual Temple podcast, and that's where I get to talk to really amazing people. You're going to be on too,
Yeah.
and I'm very excited to
Exciting.
chat with you there. Um, Mainly about sort of the realm of sort of what either the spirit, the unseen, whatever people think that is. I'm curious about what other folks their conception of it is. And so that has been just basically a lifelong mystery to me.
Yeah.
Um, and so the beginnings of that would be when I was like a small child, probably pre 5 years old, and just kind of, observing the world. And I have had like very adult thoughts. Like I would be like, oh, my name, thinking very logically and analytically
Mm,
about the name that was given to me.
mm,
And I'm like, that's strange. Like, what does that even mean? So, like that kind of thing.
yeah.
One of my very first memories was looking up out of my crib and seeing like the curtains that were hanging above, and and I knew the flowers were called bluebells.
Oh.
And I don't think my parents ever told me that. I don't think maybe they did, but
Yeah.
I was like, oh, those are bluebells. And I was like, well, how did I know that?
Yeah. You
Like, I
remembered
don't
it
understand.
maybe. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Um, and I always had, and I definitely talked about like sort of like the strange things that were happening just pre 5 years old, were kind of scary. And in talking to some people, I found that there are also other people that had sort of weird, scary experiences with either spirit or the unseen or
Mm,
whatever's going on
mm,
there.
mm.
Um, yeah, and so I had like little imaginary friends that I couldn't see, but I could hear them. And so they would like kind of, they were kind of funny. They would like tell me, have like funny observations that would pop in my head,
Their
that sort
voices?
of thing. Yeah, they were kind of voices, but it wasn't like I could hear them externally. It
Yeah.
was like sort of like in my head, but it wasn't. I knew as a kid, I was like, that's not me.
Yeah.
And like even then, I was like, how do I know that?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not me.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was like they were kind of funny for a while. They would play practical jokes, mainly on other people. And then they started playing practical jokes on me. And then that's when it became kind of scary. And I'm kind of terrified of bugs.
Yeah.
Not so much that I can't handle myself, but
Mm.
I really don't like bugs. I'd rather them just not be near me,
Yeah, I get
even
that.
as an adult.
Very understandable.
Um, but there was like there's like two instances. One where there was like my dad was fished, right? He used to go fishing, and he had like a cup of crickets on like this side table in our living room, and I was like staring at this cup of crickets because one, when you're a kid, you're like fascinated but also terrified of things at the same time. So I'm like staring at this cup of crickets, like, oh my God, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, like it, boop, it tipped over. Like, how would it
Oh
tip over?
no.
Like,
That's a nasty
I,
joke. Yeah.
yes. And of course, all the crickets come out, and I'm screaming. And also knew I was going to get in big trouble, right? Because my dad was very, like, very particular. And,
Mm.
so I had to run to find my mom. And my poor mom was like having to scoop up all the crickets because I was like, I'm not touching these.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was really weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would that happen? And then the one instance that was pretty much like set me off, like, I don't want this anymore, it's too scary. And I know I shared this on Jason's channel,
Mm.
but I used to have this very large teddy bear that sat on a table and in my bedroom. And I was walking by to go to the bathroom, and I heard a voice, and this was external, right? It was not in my head. I heard a voice say, "Hey, Michelle," or Merrily,
Yeah.
Merrily, "Hey, Merrily, come in here." Um, and I was like, "What?" And so I go in and I see the teddy bear. It's cute, it's big, and I was like, "Oh, um, that's cute." And then all of a sudden, I see like a spider leg come out of like
Oh
the
yeah.
eyeball
I
right out of
remember
the
this.
eyeball of the teddy bear. And then it's like, but it's large. It's like about the size of my palm.
Oh
Yeah. And I was like,
yeah.
what the hell is that? And then it's coming, and I'm, again, as a child, you're like fascinated and terrified. So you're still, it's like, what is happening? And it's like, and then a spider came out, and then all these spiders came out and like covered the teddy bear. And I was like,
Oh
freaking
yeah.
and just screaming, right? And screaming my head off. And I feel like one or two of my parents came and were trying to, like, what is going on with you?
Yeah.
And I was just, and so I just told whatever it was. And I was like, no, no more. You can't do that to me. I was like very firm with it. I was like, no, don't even. And then I know, like, after that, I heard the little try to, like, hey, try to play with me again. Like, hey, hey. And I was like, nope, out.
Mm.
Not
Mm.
again.
Mm.
So that was always weird. And I always think about that,
Yeah.
and then I was like, what is that? And so, forgot about it for a long time. Um, and then in the meantime, it was like, there's a lot of stuff going on at home. My parents divorced. There's just, a lot of mental health issues going around
Mm.
the
Mm.
family.
Yeah.
My dad decided because we were born, or not born, but he was raised Irish Catholic American. My mom was raised Filipino Catholic. So, but I would say we were sort of Catholic as far as, like, I was concerned. We would just go to church on Christmas
Yeah.
or Easter, that sort of thing. Um, but then at around age, I don't know, maybe 10 or so, my dad decided he wanted to go to like a fundamentalist Christian church called the Truth Tabernacle in Phoenix, Arizona. I looked it up, still there.
Wow.
So anybody, like, you'll see what had to go through.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it was a very fundamentalist church, and I was a very precocious kid. Like, one thing, my parents were sort of Catholic for a long time, but they were also pretty lenient in a lot of ways. And I'm actually kind of very thankful for that.
Mm.
I'm thankful for kind of being exposed to something higher.
Yeah.
And it was like, as a kid, you're like, wow, all these adults believe in something they can't see.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, right? And that I can't see either, right? Like, what's going on? And then and so I was reading, and my dad had the Bible, and he would read the Bible. And I read the Bible like 3 times, even though, like, you have to power through like something like like Numbers. I'm sure I
Yeah,
fell
that's
asleep
wild.
through fell asleep through that.
Yeah.
Um, but I loved Genesis because it's such a beautiful mythic story.
Mm.
How it's just beautiful. I love it. And the teachings of Jesus, I was like, this guy, he's great. I like that
Nice
guy.
guy.
He's such a nice guy, and he's very concerned about others, and everybody having a good experience. And so I
Mm.
was like, I like that guy. But yeah, we went to, we started going to this church that my dad would take us to. And it was one of those churches where, um, you weren't allowed to watch TV. But my dad, he was like, we can watch TV, but like 1 hour a week or something. So you have to really pick what you want to
Yeah,
watch.
yeah.
You can't watch TV because it's evil.
Mm.
You can't, there's a lot of, you can't do things.
Yeah.
And And it was where they were speaking in tongues,
Mm.
very ecstatic, sort of that sort of thing. And they, let's see, and they would also make me and my brothers and sisters go do Sunday school, which was fine. But, I noticed that they would tell us, or they were telling me, because they would separate us by age groups.
Uh,
And so in my age group, they were like, oh yes, um, if you don't surrender to the will of God, and you are therefore satanic, and you and all of your family is going to be tortured in the
mm.
fires of hell. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I was like, this is not what Jesus is talking about. And Jesus is way more recent, you guys, in the Bible. Just
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and I noticed at some of the sermons, the way things were interpreted, I was like, I don't think you read it, or you read it in a way that is not the intention of something, right?
Yeah, you read
You're
into it.
doing, yeah, you're doing like what is it called? The rule of law and not the spirit of the law,
Mm,
you
mm,
know?
mm.
And so you're taking things very literally and not, so I was like, I just like, oh my God, these people, what are we doing? Um, and so yeah, so that was just like a terrible, like a not, I mean, it was a good experience in a lot of ways, because it was like, wow, this is really
Yeah.
confusing as a kid, because you're like, they don't understand what's
Yes.
going on in this book.
I'm curious, did it
Yeah.
make you more fearful or did it make you just like, oh, I don't want to spend time with this? Like what
Yeah.
kind of response did it have in you?
That's a great question. Okay, so I would say there was a little fear,
Mm.
and one example would be, and my sister brings this up all the time, like they pulled me in a room, they meaning like some of the church older people pulled me in a room and my brother and sister. And one of the things was, at a certain age, you were supposed to like be enthralled with spirit and start speaking tongues, right? They would like
Oh,
make you speak
you're
tongues.
supposed to.
You're supposed to,
Ah,
right?
okay, I didn't know
And they
that.
would pray over you and you would have to, and I was like, oh God. Anyway, so they pulled me in this room, and just to get out of it, right, I faked it. I was like, I am gonna fake speaking tongues. um yeah, and so that was like from fear, I think, because I was just like, I just leave me alone, like
Yeah.
don't I don't know what this is, and I honestly still don't even know what people were doing. Maybe some were faking, maybe they were having ecstatic
Mm.
experiences too, or I don't know. But for me, I was like, I was definitely faking, and my sister brings it up all the time. Like,
What
remember
ab
that time?
Yeah, what about your siblings? What did they do when they had to do
Yeah.
that?
Oh, well, you know what? We moved in with my mom and my stepdad, so we didn't uh maybe like a year or two later.
Ah,
So they didn't have to do it, right?
lucky them.
I know. So I was like, why are you like picking on me?
Yeah,
I had to do it.
now she gets to tell the story and she didn't even go. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I
so
got it.
true. So it's definitely some fear, but there's also like, I think it just, I have like a little bit of a rebellious spirit, you
Yeah.
know. In my astrology chart, my ascendant is Aries, which is the god of war, ruled by Mars. So, um, but my sun sign is Pisces, which is like kind of more of a peaceful, spiritually inclined um nature. But I have this like this rebellious streak
I
in
like
there
that
for sure.
balance. That's a fun
Yes,
balance.
it is fun and is also very frustrating and
I can imagine. Yeah.
scary. Yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, there's definitely a little bit of fear, but more rebellion and like,
Yeah.
I know better than what you're telling
That's
me.
kind of what I felt it sounded like, which is not, I think, usual for
Yeah.
a child that, well, what age were you about when this?
Probably from 10 to 12, somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
quite like an age where I think a lot of kids are more, would be more fearful because they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
assume that kind of adults, at least that's what I would think, they wouldn't assume that adults would tell them like things that weren't true or that were kind of misleading. Like it seemed you had kind of a head on you already then, like
Mm-hmm.
kind of a reflective type of mind, which yeah, again, I think is rare. I'm not sure, but
Hmm.
it sounds fun. It sounds a bit mischievous and rebellious. I like it. I'm imagining like a younger you. Like, what are you guys talking about?
Oh, yeah. Just like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and unfortunately, like to your point, I do think, sort of the trauma around having adults in your family that maybe have mental health struggles,
Mm,
and then so you're like, yeah, even at a young age, and you're like, wow, that's not normal. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
So then you kind of have to rely on yourself, to make those judgments because, you're like, I am not experiencing what they're experiencing,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
So there's pluses and minuses, to going through things, where you kind of have to learn things, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a fun time. Um, yeah, definitely had sort of like, and I was always very interested in just strange things. My dad, he had all sorts of crazy books about like UFOs. Like this is back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So UFO, he would have that. He had books on channeling. He was very interested in a lot of the subject, like psychic ability. Like he had a lot of books, and I read those things over and over again because I was so
So this is
fascinated
your
by.
dad,
Yeah, my dad.
and this is your
Mm-hmm.
dad that took you to the fundamentalist church. He also had this
Yes.
all these
Yes.
interests. That's interesting. That's an interesting mix.
Yes. I have my dad's passed, but I have a suspicion, and we were very estranged for pretty much my entire life after that. But I feel like I have a suspicion that he was having similar experiences and he was trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
And his family is Irish American,
Mm.
and I am in touch with my uncle and a cousin on that side of the family. They're also very interested in this subject and stuff. So I feel like it's something that is like probably happening um, to the members of that side of my family, but they don't know what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, that's my suspicion of
All
why
right.
he was so interested in that. And then why I became interested in it because I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Did your siblings pick that up as well, or was it just you?
Um, oh, you mean like having strange things happen to
Well,
them?
I guess the interest of your dad with the UFOs and the
Oh.
psychic phenomena, is that something that your siblings were interested in?
Yeah, probably. I think they were interested a little bit in like the psychic phenomenon
Yeah.
because I would pull them in and do sort of like Zener cards with them, but with like playing cards,
Mhm.
So we would like try to guess like what suit, right? We would play and I would make them guess. So
Yeah.
they would like humor me in that, but I think I was more definitely the one that was like very interested in it and would read about it all the time. But they were okay with me pulling them in to test our
Yeah.
psychic abilities.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a realm that uh, yeah, things that were completely out of my imagination for most of my life, you know what I mean? I think
Oh,
also I'm from the Netherlands and from Europe,
yeah.
and I feel like churches here are so much more kind of mellow.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Like
good.
there's just a lot less it's not as experience based, for better and for worse. So
Hmm.
it
Oh.
I think it just feels all a bit more um low key. I don't know. I don't want to say boring just to like do a disservice to, but that was my experience growing up, to the
Yeah.
point where kind of these type of topics, from UFOs to psychic phenomena to even speaking in tongues, it was just completely out of my reality, I guess.
Oh.
Um so it's interesting. So yeah, it's interesting to hear because it sounded like a lot of, strangeness, I guess, in your upbringing.
Yeah, yeah, but it was like very, it was strange, but then like nothing would
Yes.
happen for a
Okay. Yeah.
long
Yeah.
time.
I get you. I get you.
um, but yeah, it was, and it's more like looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, this happened,
Yes.
kind of
Okay.
connecting through
Yeah.
time. Like, oh, that's weird. Um, yeah, and I know that I think I didn't share that, but there, and as a teenager, living, we were living in Washington State where I am now, and so had like a couple experiences of like not, like astral projection, like out of your body.
Yeah.
Um, and one I remember was like pretty funny. I have like a weird what is it? Like a weird sensitivity to time.
Okay.
Meaning like when I was a teen, especially when I was a teenager, I didn't have an alarm clock. Like I could just wake up at 6 o'clock
Nice.
in the morning to go to sleep.
Yes.
Like, boom.
Yeah, my grandpa has that or had that,
Oh,
I should say.
weird.
Yeah, yeah. He
Really?
even when he would have to go to the airport at like 4:30 in the morning, he
Yeah.
would just be able to jolt himself up exactly at the time.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had that. You didn't have an alarm clock. That's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't have an alarm clock, but I think I figured out why is because like I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like hovering, like I was trying to look at my clock, but I didn't realize I was like kind of floating horizontally because my clock was on the other side of the
Yeah, yeah,
bedroom.
yeah.
And I was like trying to stare at the clock, but the numbers were all fuzzy. Like I
Mm,
couldn't make out what the time was.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
staring at it. I'm like, why is this all fuzzy? Like it was covered in Vaseline or something. I was like,
Uh,
why? I can't
uh,
see this.
uh.
And I'm like, why am I floating like this? It's like
Yeah,
looking at my clock. And I think I just went boop right back into my body after I was like, I don't think I'm in my back. Boop, right back in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
So yeah, things like sort of astral projection experiences there.
Mm,
But then I would say, like, we're gonna just fast forward. I've always been interested in spirituality and that sort of thing, exploring different methodologies. But the main thing, probably, let's see, what year is this? 13 years ago, so like 2012,
hmm
um, or 2013. But I got laid off from my job, my corporate job that I had for like 7 years,
yeah,
and I was like, well, I'm just gonna listen to spiritual converse like things on a at the time as an audiobook,
yeah.
and I'm just going to go for long walks. That's what I'm going to do with like
Nice.
being unemployed.
Yeah, that's good.
And so oddly enough, there's a comedian at the or he's still around, Eddie Pepitone. He's amazing, he's so
Okay.
funny.
Yeah.
And I listened to converse podcast that he was on, and he would always talk about Eckhart Tolle or
Yeah.
Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
And I was like, I should like look into Eckhart Tolle. And so I was like, I'll listen, I started listening to Power of Now.
hmm
And that's when he started talking about sort of the awareness that sits like above your head. And I was like, is that there? Is there something? And I was like, yeah, there is like something there, like observing, right?
Yeah.
Quiet and silently observing, but you can kind of connect to it. And I was like, that's weird.
Yeah.
Um, and he just has very interesting sort of and very simple ways of explaining sort of energy and energy bodies and things
Mm-hmm.
that surround us and like how
Mm-hmm.
they can influence you as a person. So I was like, wow, this is really cool and fascinating. And so like uh so started following Eckhart Tolle for a while, and then maybe a few years later, I got into a car accident. It was a very low speed car accident. So 2017
Mm-hmm.
car accident, and I hurt my back. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody was like, go, go to the chiropractor, get, do all that stuff. I was like, okay. And then they were like, you should do some yoga, stretch your back. And I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't want to do like regular yoga because I was
Yeah.
like, there's something about regular yoga to me that, at least this practice in the United States, where it's
Yeah.
like very much focused on just your body
Yes.
and a
Yes.
little tiny bit about meditation,
Yes.
like a teeny tiny bit.
Absolutely.
And I was like, and for whatever reason, I was like, I feel like I don't want to do that. And so I was trying to see if there's any sort of other kinds of yoga. And there's a teacher here in Seattle, Sada Simran, and he did Kundalini yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And years before, I had done Kundalini meditation, which is literally doing like all the deep breathing, breath of fire, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll try Kundalini. I read some reviews. I was like, oh, this is probably what I'm looking for, because he would do like meditation and chanting. And I was like, that seems more integrated.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I started doing Kundalini yoga. So I would get the benefit of having the physical body stretch. But he would also do like a 20-minute layout where he would play the gong. So then you would get like energy or sound healing.
Yeah.
And then there would be 11 minutes at the end where you would sit and we would chant a mantra for 11 minutes.
Mm.
And there was also a lot of doing like mudras and like hand placements and stuff. I
Yeah.
was like, this is what I think,
This is
for
the
me
stuff.
anyway,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
the stuff.
I
This
get
is
it.
what I think is more integrated, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I did, yeah. So I was doing Kundalini yoga for quite a few years, and I love it. I'm not like a seasoned or like I know all the moves or
Yeah.
anything like that, but I do think it's like I do love it. Like it's probably my preferred um yoga, that and like yin yoga because it's
Yeah.
so
That's actually
relaxing.
I'm doing that straight after this podcast before sleep.
Oh, it's perfect for nighttime for
It's
sure.
so nice. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, so that was sort of what I was doing for quite a long time. And then, and then I always say, 2020 hit and it was like my husband and I call it the magical mystery tour. And to bring my husband up, like all through this time, we've been together since, gosh, 2021, or sorry, 2001.
Yeah,
We've been together a long, long time.
yeah.
And he's very psychic. He's always having strange experiences.
Ah,
I always make fun of him, or not make fun of him, but I tease him and I'm like, oh, did you complete your bingo card of like the weird beings that you've met? Because he's like had like experiences with all sorts of strange things.
yeah.
And then as like through that time before 2020, it was like, oh, he's psychic. He has these experiences. Those things don't happen to me, right? Not
Mm,
remembering, not thinking about the things that had happened before.
mm,
And so I was like, well, that's his experience. And I would never say like that didn't happen to him because he's like, no, this stuff happens. These things are real. And I was like, okay, he's having an experience and these things are real and that's fine. It's not happening for me. Right.
yeah,
Um, but then, in 2020, uh, with the whole lockdown, I was fortunate enough to have a job that still allowed me to work from home.
yeah,
And so I had my setup for my home computer and everything in the living room. And I was doing Kundalini yoga with my teacher who was doing it online. And um, so I had like my laptop on the table and I was on the floor doing the different kriyas and movements that, my teacher was doing. And then I had my two huge black monitors that I use for work and they're turned off. And, he had us do like kind of in the middle of doing like a bunch of kriya. He was like, we're just going to do like a 5-minute meditation. I was like, oh, okay. So did the meditation and I happened to like open my eyes and look at my monitor. And there was like a thing on the monitor. There was like this kind of cloudy image, or not image. It was more like a symbol on the monitor.
mm,
And I was staring at it because it looked like kind of like golden smoke.
yeah.
And I could see it, but I could kind of see the shape, but I could also feel what the shape was. So it's very strange. So it was very synthesis.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, it's like forming like a heart and there's wings coming off of it. And there's like a little line. I was like, there's wings coming off and it's forming a heart. It's like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And then, and I was just kind of staring at it because in a meditative thing, you're just very observant.
Yes.
But I was also like, what the heck is that? And then so I looked at it and then I was like, is that like a afterburn, right? Because
Mm,
when you look at some stuff, you get like an afterburn
yeah,
on your eyeball.
exactly.
And I was like, is it on the screen that I'm watching? No. Is it in my room? No. Look back, it's still there. Like I'm like looking around, it's still hovering in the same spot. And I was like staring at it and I was like, what is this? um and eventually, it faded as I was going back into like doing, my class with my teacher online. And then afterwards, I was telling my husband, JC, I was like, hey, I saw this. He was like, you saw a caduceus. I was like, oh, what? And I didn't know what that was. And for those who don't know, you most likely in America, everybody's familiar with like the medical symbol,
Yeah,
which is like the wings and then the snake and it,
yeah.
which is hilarious to me because they use the caduceus, but for medical things, it's Asclepius, which is just the
Ah,
one staff with one snake
it
wrapped around
is.
it.
Yeah,
But they use the caduceus as their symbol. So that's what it is. And then I was like, well, what do I do with that?
yeah,
Like, I don't know what it is.
yeah.
Um, and then this was happening when I was like looking at different people sort of giving alternative viewpoints on spirituality. I was looking at Damien Eccles, who you might be familiar with. He was doing magic sessions online.
Okay.
And then also Mitch Horowitz, who talks about maybe more like positive mental attitude
Mm,
and what is that called? Sort of like The Secret, but not The Secret.
yeah, okay. I got
Sort
you.
of that manifestation sort of things.
Yeah,
And I was like,
yeah,
this is
yeah, yeah.
interesting. I should, and I'm always very experimental. I like to be experimental. So I was like, let me try some of these methods.
Yeah.
So I'm trying them. And I was like, I'm seeing some success in them and like learning a lot from doing things that Damien was teaching and also Mitch. And then having this thing about the caduceus, I was like, oh, I feel like my path is more some sort of magical path and it intertwines with the god Mercury, Hermes, that sort of thing.
I see.
Um, yeah, and so that's kind of where it like set me off of like maybe going down a more sort of magical path. Um, and that would be uh doing like started out doing the Western ceremonial magic
Mm,
tradition,
mm.
which is based off of the Golden Dawn, and doing a lot of like banishing, lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, which is drawing a pentagram in the four corners, and the pentagram is a symbol for the human being.
Okay.
So it's if you look at a human being, we look like
Yeah.
starfish,
Yeah. 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 Okay. I see the. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so not freak anybody out, but it's literally human. Like, we're drawing what we are in the
Yes.
corners, and you call angels like the main or sort of archangels that represent the four directions into the corners, and you just it's basically sort of clearing your system, the idea. And like during doing one of these, I was doing it for months. You're supposed to do it like twice a day for a long like 6 months, and so maybe like 2 months into it, I'm noticing there's like presences in the room.
Mm,
Like you
mm,
can feel it, like
mm,
pressure.
mm.
And I was doing it and I was drawing and I felt this thing in the corner of the room and it was really tall. That's all I could feel, that it was really tall.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are you? And then it like poop. And then for whatever reason, I could see, like, I'm standing there, but I could see myself standing there because it like allowed me to see through its eyes,
Through
like
its
me
eyes.
doing
So you're
what
like
it
up
is.
as well.
Yeah. So I was
Yeah.
up, but
Okay.
I was also like standing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really weird.
What, did you have your
Um,
eyes open when you were looking at
yeah,
yourself? And
yeah.
did you look at
I
yourself? Did you
um
did yourself look at you?
That's a great question. No, no, that's a really good question because it was more like I could see the top of my head,
Ah, okay,
right?
okay. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
And I could see the top of my head and I could see like my wall that I was facing. But I was like, this is very strange. Like I don't understand what this is. And then, finished what I was doing as far as that ritual. And I called my husband JC over. And I was like, I didn't tell him anything. I was like, can you feel something in this corner? What do you feel? Right.
Yeah.
And he was like, it's tall.
Yo, that's crazy.
And he's like, and then it moved back. He was like, it moved away once he looked at it. And I was like, okay, this is weird. um, so yeah, so then it just started that whole process of like, oh, when you start doing these things, you start meditating or you start
Yeah.
kind of being more sensitive, those things can see and they're
Yeah.
like interested in what you're doing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then I started doing mainly, and I still like that's the majority of my practice is planetary rituals. Mainly learned and influenced or inspired by Foolish Fish, Denis Poisson, who's an amazing person. He's great. He has a YouTube channel as well.
Okay.
And he would do planetary rituals every day. And I was like, oh, I kind of like the idea of that, right? Because the planets hold different aspects
Yeah.
of human beings, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of like the idea of like every day you kind of commune with the planetary aspect of, say, Mars. I talked about Mars.
Yeah.
And what does that mean as a human being? What does that energy mean, right? So I do that every day for every planet. You do a devotional, light a candle. I read from the Orphic hymns. Um, you know, for
What are these
the
hymns? Where are they from? What is
Yeah.
the language? Is it English or?
Oh, great question. Originally, I believe it was written in Greek.
Ah,
Um, so the Orphic hymns came from Greece, and they are different hymns written not only about just the planets, but they're hymns written about like light
hmm.
or certain seasons of the year. other gods and goddesses that aren't necessarily associated to planets, but are still sort of aspects of human beings. Like one that my husband really likes to do devotionals to is the goddess Hestia. And she is like the goddess of the hearth, right? Like as human beings, that's
Yeah.
an important thing, right?
Yeah.
Fire and warmth and community. And the kitchen is like the central heart of like any home. And so Hestia is like a very, interesting thing because you're like, oh, I don't think of that, but it's nice to, really give some attention and energy
Yeah.
toward the heart of a house or warmth,
Mm.
and community. So it's like a very cool energy.
Yeah, I like it. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Um, yeah. So I would say sort of like, fast forward through today as my main practice is doing the planetary devotional rituals. I also work with the Kabbalah, and that came out of working with like the Western ceremonial tradition and Damien Eccles. But I kind of took my own path of doing doing it of the I call it, or it's the Hermetic Kabbalah.
Yeah.
So combining Hermeticism, which is like the balance of male and female energy,
I see.
um, and then like in the Kabbalah, there's three pillars, and so you have like the masculine energy on one side, the feminine on the other side. And as a human being, we're like the central pillar. And then
Mm.
there is where we balance, the idea is try to balance, right? We're human beings, we're not going to get it perfect,
Yeah.
but we try to balance those energies within ourselves because then that will like help propel us, to what our true nature is, our true, being is, at
Yes.
least in that philosophy. So
So,
I do a lot of that.
what do you think our true being is, if I may ask?
As far as like our like our spiritual being, or
Well, whatever you were referring to just now of balancing the two energies, which
oh
I believe you meant are the masculine and feminine,
yeah,
or there's other ones involved. Is it those two pillars that you were referring to?
yeah. So I do think for me, because it helps me understand
Yes.
sort of what I'm doing,
Yeah.
is that there is the two energies that we are all constantly balancing between. We're getting
Yeah.
pulled in those directions all the time. Um, and so how do you balance that? Well, you can kind of look at the opposite end of the spectrum and say, maybe I need to balance,
Yes.
say again, Mars
Yes.
energy with more Venus, like love energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I balance that out? And a lot of that seeking is done through contemplation and meditation that
Mm.
I'll do on the specific spheres and doing sort of different, like right now, I do this thing where I'm focused on one specific Sephirah, which is one of the spheres on the tree of life.
Okay.
And right now I'm working with Binah, which is the third sphere, and it's associated to the planet of Saturn.
Uh,
And so, yeah, just figuring out like, what does this even mean? How does it apply to me as a person? How does it apply and how does it show up in the world?
yeah.
How do I work with that energy? Or, yeah, it's
I see.
basically kind of it.
Well, I have a lot of questions.
Oh, yes.
I'm really interested in this this planetary ritual thing and also
Yeah.
the kind of the meaning of planets and how they relate to gods and goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
So my background, academically speaking, is I studied Egyptology, and so
Oh,
I
cool.
I spent a lot of time trying to understand gods and kind of asking also my teachers about it, and I never really got to a satisfactory point. My thesis was also related to that, um, gods and goddesses and such. And so I read a lot about it from the Egyptian point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'm still struggling kind of with, yeah, it's very broad. So what I'm proposing is very broad, but I'm just letting you know what kind of things I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
So gods, goddesses, how they relate to us, how they relate to the
Mm-hmm.
planets, if there's like a cause from the planets to us, things to read in the stars, in the planets. Like these are a lot of kind of the questions that I'm playing with. I don't know if that's something that you can do something with, or if I need to be more direct in my questioning.
No, I think those are really great questions. I love that you studied Egyptology, and I definitely want to talk about the
Yeah.
Egyptian gods because they're amazing. Um, I'll just say that I did have, and this is again like the information that comes to me is to help me understand something.
Yeah,
So everybody is free to like come to their own conclusions
of
about
course.
things. But I had this like literally this vision. It was really weird. um, and it was for like 3 days, and it was like playing like a tape over my head, and it was literally like a blue ball, which I knew was like a human's soul
Mm.
descending down through our galaxy.
Yeah,
And I saw it like descend, how, there's the sun and all the planets
yeah.
are rotating around the sun.
Mm.
Well, I saw this blue ball as it hit, say, the orbit. Oh gosh, this is where I don't know all the different planets, but
Yeah,
let's just say Venus. Like it hits the orbit of Venus. I
yeah.
saw like a timestamp and like coordinates, and it would hit Jupiter. Same thing, timestamp, coordinates. And then
Uh,
as it passed through each of the orbits of the planets, it would have this strange timestamp, like and coordinates like associated. I didn't see what they were exactly,
yes.
but then I saw the blue ball like enter into a baby that was in a womb,
Mm.
like not like gross or anything. It was more like spiritual and
Mm.
beautiful, like beautiful looking.
Mm.
But it entered into the back of the head, like like the back of the head, and I
Mm.
was like, that's fascinating.
Yeah, to say the least.
And this thing kept playing over and over again. 3 days, I would just like it would just be like a tape
Mm. Mm.
until I told my Jason, my husband, JC, I was like, this is what I'm seeing. And I explained it to him. And then it finally stopped, like after I got it out.
Yeah.
Um, and the weirdest thing was I literally told him that 30 minutes before I had a Reiki session with Tiffany, who was on Casual Temple. And she does Reiki, but she's also like a psychic intuitive. And one of the things, no joke, that she said during the session was like, they're pointing, your guides are pointing to the back of the head. And I don't know why that is. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me?
That's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on.
yeah,
This is strange.
yeah.
So all of that to say, what I was shown is like the soul is imprinted by the planets. You are given different um, blessings,
Yeah.
challenges by the planets as a soul, right?
Mhm.
Entering. And this is, a lot of people, different uh, religions or, different ways
Yeah.
of thinking about this kind
Yeah.
of have said the same thing.
Mhm.
But I was very much shown that, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And so, in working with the planets, it's like using your astrology chart, right? You can sort of see where you were given blessings by the different planets, right? Where you were given some things to look at, to see if you want to change them, or, you want to see how does this energy affect me? Like in my chart, for instance, I'll say Saturn is in my fifth house, which happens to be to kind of summarize it, it's like the house of fun, right? It's ruled by Venus.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
like
Mm.
things you like to do to relax, relationships, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, which is very funny to me, because then if Saturn sits in that house, it means like, and I was told this by another astrologer. He was like, you had a lot of past lives where you sat in monasteries, like you were in monasteries meditating. And I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, but this life, because Saturn is sitting in your fifth house, you need to have a lot of fun. You need to go out and experience and not be trapped in a monastery anymore. And I was like, that's fascinating. Um, so, so you can look at sort of your chart and see areas where you can even capitalize it,
Yeah.
capitalize on sort of the planetary placements. Another example for me is that Jupiter is in third house
Mm.
in Cancer. And if that's apparently this is a very fantastic placement for Jupiter. It's in a house that is his house. It's basically if a planet is in its own house
Yeah.
that he is like, I'm at home. I
Yeah.
love it here. This is amazing. And in his sign, so Cancer is also a sign of Jupiter. So
Mm.
then it's like, so for me, for Jupiter, it means like very spiritually inclined,
Uh,
very much about like expansion, either materially, like so wealth, or like in a spiritual sense.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's where I was like, oh, okay, there's a lot of planetary astrological things.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, so that kind of helps with that.
yeah. Oh, there's so much there. I'm
Yeah.
very interested in like ancient astrology, kind of what that
Mm,
practice would have looked like
yeah.
at the time, and it makes me curious about um, kind of the way that you do this astrology chart because I'm really
Mm-hmm.
unfamiliar with astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm definitely at a point where I think there's something to it. I would be more skeptical in the past, partially because of
Yeah.
maybe like modern day, like I look in the
Oh,
paper and this is the thing, and then I'm
yeah.
like, I've read a lot of Plato,
Mm,
and he was very interested in that also, and there seems to be kind of I don't know if this is if you can align with this, but the idea that everyone has their own kind of unique astrology sign that's almost irreplicable in
yeah.
other people. Is that kind of does that kind of align with your way of looking at
Do you
astrology, or does
like,
does it repeat? Like, does everyone have their unique kind of bound to your exact? I don't know if it's the moment that you were born or the qualities that
yeah.
you're given. Does everyone have their own unique kind of thing there?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
is it? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Okay,
Yes, for sure. That was pretty much what I was shown was
yeah,
like, the different coordinates and the
yeah.
time
So that's
stamps.
why it made so much sense when you were saying that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, that really checks out what I feel about it. Let's say.
Yeah. So weird. Yeah.
So how does it work? Like how
Uh-huh.
and like from where do you get your uh chart and stuff like that? I'm curious
Oh gosh.
about that stuff.
Um, well, I'm very much kind of I wouldn't say, I'm definitely not anywhere near like an expert, and I'm not
Oh,
anywhere near like not anything like that. I am studying it to an extent. And for me, I just literally, like, everybody has used CoStar. I have CoStar on my thing. I don't look at the daily stuff. I literally just look at my chart all the time.
uh-uh.
And kind of to what you were saying, I don't like a lot of sort of the current
Mm,
astrology stuff, especially when it does daily. I don't
mm,
I don't know. It just doesn't work for me.
mm,
Um what you can look at is maybe more transits, right? Like,
mm,
say, I try to look at things like Jupiter because I have such a great placement in Jupiter. I'm like, where is Jupiter going to be happy in this year, right?
mm,
And maybe I think about things that Jupiter cares about during that time period. So then I have more clarity, more like uh, things that come to me so that align with what Jupiter cares about. So like right now, I'm looking at like figuring out how to retire.
yeah,
Looking at like
that's
wealth
nice.
expansion and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but as far as like, so yeah, you can like look at your chart and see, and this is literally what I do because I'm not like anywhere near like an expert or know
Mhm,
everything, is I'll look at like a planet, the placement of that planet in my chart. I'm like, what does the internet say? Like what certain things say this placement is about. And a good site is like Astrodienst, dienst.com. That's a really good one. They also provide like little readings and explanations.
yeah.
Christopher Warnock, who is an astrological and planetary magician, he also
Okay, we're back. We're back. Good.
all right, we back.
And we lost me again. Keep talking. It's just the camera. Yeah.
Oh, sure. So Christopher Warnock, who is an astrological magician and planetary magician, he also used Astrodienst, the website.
Hmm.
He recommends that one to look at. So it'll give you your chart, your placements, and it'll give you a little explanation about what that means. And I would recommend, if anybody's interested, to kind of take a look at it and see how it applies to your life. Now, when I said the Saturn is in my fifth house, right? That would say like, oh, you have a hard time having fun, you have a hard time da 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 da, like you have
Yeah.
a lot of hard times with that. And I initially thought like, that's not me.
Mm,
Just like, I like to have a lot of fun, I like to do
yeah.
this. But if I think about it sort of the course of my lifetime, I'm like, maybe I was just sort of unconsciously trying to rebalance that, right?
Yeah.
To
Okay.
not fall into the pattern of just being no fun,
Yeah.
like ruining everybody else's fun kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, because I've done a lot of really fun things in my life. I traveled a lot, and I have a lot of really great friends. I've had a lot of really wonderful experiences. So I think I was just unconsciously already trying to balance it without knowing that placement in my chart, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something to think about
Mhm.
as people look at their own charts.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it can get really very convoluted and very detailed about what you want to focus on or look at. I would just say, like, if you're new to it, look at your chart, see one thing that kind of resonates and makes sense to you, and
Okay.
see, just kind of notice in your life how it has applied to you or
Yeah.
not, or how, how is this showing up in your life, right? Use it as a way. I look at it as a map of, like, essentially when that stamp happens, right, for the soul as it goes into the baby, it's
Yeah.
kind of like programming as in a computer, right? Like, you arrive here with a program,
Yeah.
um and that's sort of your personality,
I see.
that's driving the
Yeah.
human
Yeah.
car around.
Yeah. Yeah.
um but it doesn't mean that program can't be changed, right? Like, you can rewrite the code of that, is if it's not what you want, right,
Yes.
as you propel forward in your life.
Yeah.
So I look at, like, the astrology chart as a way of knowing sort of the program or the map that you were given,
Mhm.
but you as the programmer or as the person driving the car, like, do I want that in my life? And
Yeah.
you can work to change it if it is showing up the way it's showing you. And again, you might have unconsciously already rebalanced something in your chart without knowing it, like I did, and I was like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then you find that out. That makes sense.
yeah. So I think, as far as Plato and a lot of, like, if you look at a lot of these, like, ancient philosophers, they were also very much interested in astrology. I
Mhm.
think they kind of saw that. They were
Yeah.
like, oh, this is just a tool. If you look at
Mhm.
it as a tool of me kind of understanding why I have tendencies this way or that way.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and just kind of use it like that. And I wouldn't, get freaked out about anything. It's like, if you see it here, there's a lot of, like, fear mongering,
I see.
and a lot of modern day astrology that I don't really care for.
Yeah.
Um, but so I would just take it as, like, a guide and not, like, the truth, the spirit of the law, and not like the letter of
Exactly.
the
Not the
law.
rule of the law. Okay.
Yeah, the rule of law. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes
yeah,
sense. Well, I'll check it out. The website. I'll check it out after. I'm
yeah,
interested. Okay. So I'd like to also talk a bit about magic because I'm
yeah.
not really figuring out what magic is or
Hmm.
exactly how it works. And I've been talking a lot about magic um, without
Yeah.
any real background in it or experience with it, or maybe I have, I don't know, unconsciously. But yeah, I'd like
Hmm.
to get your idea on what magic really is and kind of, yeah, how it maybe works.
Yeah, I would say try, that's such a great question. Have I really sat down and thought about what magic is? Um, I think magic is, if you look at the tarot, right?
Yeah.
So the Rider Waite Smith, and you see the magician card,
Yeah.
and if you kind of stare at the card, you realize that the magician has tools available to them, and the tools all relate. They're all in the tarot too. They have the pentacle, which is about, related to earth, the
Mhm.
element of earth. They
Mhm.
have a wand, which is the element of fire and creativity. So the wand. And then I think there's a cup, um, and which is like emotions and related to water. Oh my gosh, am I forgetting something? Oh, and a sword, which is, did I mess up? No, a sword is representative air. So you have all the four elements of
Yeah.
what we exist in. That basically, if you think about it, it really makes up what our world is,
Yes.
what we are too.
Yeah.
Um, and so the magician has the tools available to them. So as a magician, you understand the tools that you have are related to the elements around you.
Mhm.
And if you also stare at the magician card, um, there's pointing up and pointing down, right? Pointing up, pointing down. Understanding the fact that both the macro, say like the spiritual
Yeah.
realm, whatever the universe is going on in the universe above our heads, is directly related to what is happening to us on a micro scale, right? And even if you turn inside yourself, like
Yeah.
the things going on in the cells in your body is related to what you're doing, right?
Yes.
Like as a human
Yes.
being.
So it makes sense for it to scale upward.
Yeah, exactly. Like scaling, exactly. So it scales up, scales inside,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As a magician, most people will probably be aware of um I was trying to think of what it is called, like the manifestation, or like positive thinking.
Yeah.
Probably most people are aware of like
Yeah.
sort of that philosophy. um it's similar in a way of like when you are experimenting as a magician, what you're trying to do is like, say I'm looking at my astrology chart and I want to change it, like try to redirect the energy so it's more
Mm-hmm.
beneficial to me. Well, as a magician, you say, I want this particular outcome, and you visualize what the outcome is. You really put a lot of energy toward it. You may use the different elements, the tools that are available to you to really switch the track that you are currently on, because you don't want that track.
Yeah.
That track is not for you. You
Yeah.
have meditated on it. It's not where you want to be.
Mm.
So you kind of sense what is the actual outcome that you want. And that's the most important thing, is really kind of visualizing the outcome. And then the track, gets moved over to now where you want to be aligned with. And so really what magic is just one, figuring out what you truly deeply want as a human, right? And everybody has things that they want that maybe they don't, that they um, haven't really considered,
Mm.
right? Like, what do I actually really want? Now, an example would be when I was experimenting with this, I was like, I want a job that pays me X amount of money a year. And it was like an amount of money. I was like, I will never make this amount of money. But I want a job that gives me this amount. That was literally all I like focused on.
Yeah.
7 months later, I got that job that
Wow.
paid actually $20,000 more than I thought. And I was like blown away, right? Like, oh my gosh, like how did this, what? I was like literally shocked that this actually worked.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a college degree. I don't, there's a lot of factors that I'm like, this amount is never going to happen, but it did.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I didn't visualize in this outcome was like, I would like a job that I feel valued as a human being, that the contributions that I make um, are useful, and like I'm recognized for those things. Like I didn't put energy into that. I just literally put energy into the amount of money I wanted. And so I didn't have that job for very long because it was a terrible work environment.
Yeah.
I think I was there for like 8 or 9 months.
Mm.
So it was like a terrible work environment. I felt like I just was constantly humiliated by my boss. Like it was just like awful.
Yeah.
I learned a really valuable lesson, right? Like the outcome that I visualized was very much like just the money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the next job that I've led, which is the one I have now, which I love, I was like, all the things that I actually want. I do want to get paid well. If I don't get this like huge pay, that's fine, but at least this amount. Like I gave like an amount.
Yeah.
But I want to work for a team that values me, that my work is valued, that the things I like are interesting, but I also want enough time to maybe do a podcast in the middle of the day
Yeah. That's
with
awesome.
Lucas.
Yeah.
That it's not, it's not going to be a big deal. I get to work from home. Like I gave a lot of like
Yes,
real
it is.
energy to that.
Yeah.
And I got that. I have that job now. So it's really aligning what you want to what you truly want, right? Like my mind is telling me I just need a good paying job, but
Yeah.
my heart was like, you need a good paying job.
Yeah.
But you also need to feel like a part of something, right? That's very important to
Makes
me.
sense.
And like, the things you do to help people are very much recognized, and that's exactly what is happening. So magic to me is just really aligning what you deeply truly want with the end result.
Yes. Okay. And specifying that correctly.
Yeah, being
Yeah.
very specific, but
Yes.
not so specific that you like
Yeah.
tighten it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it
too
kind of
tight.
sounds a bit like natural to me in a sense that
Yeah.
once you attune it to something more natural, kind of it can come to fruition without having the negative consequences. Because I
Yes.
kind of feel like the cautionary tales with magic are always like, well, you wished for this, but you didn't like yours
Oh,
like
right.
you didn't take that into account, and then you kind of get the wrong end of the
Hmm.
deal, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
So I
that
hope that helps.
that does help. That does help because
Oh, good.
I was trying to puzzle this out with Jason. We trying to talk about magic, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, but no, that's great. Would you tell me a bit more about kind of your podcast and why you started it, and
Mhm.
what you get out of it, maybe?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I started, well, it was again, I was having visions
Yeah,
of like, I was getting visions, I was getting I was seeing like different, I don't want to say psychics because they weren't all necessarily psychics, but a lot of like spiritually inclined people just to kind of, see what other people had to say.
yeah,
And I kept getting things about my voice, like there's something you need to do with your voice, and I was like, okay. um, but then like I started seeing like doing a podcast, and I was like, I do not want to do that. Sounds like a lot of work. I don't want my face anywhere. Like I just didn't want to do
yeah,
it. But then I thought about like I love long form conversations. I mean, I've listened to podcasts since 2005. Like I love
wow,
them so much. Yeah. Like I've been blessed to have a lot of my jobs where I do a lot of like I can have my headphones on and like do stuff,
yeah, that's the best.
which is great. Um so I was like, but I love all that. And I love talking about spiritual subjects, whether they be, or UFO, all the things that I think are
Yeah,
fun to talk about or think about or posit about. I love that. And I would have these conversations with my husband, right? Like these like long conversations. And I was like, while those conversations were amazing, I love him. 95% of the time we agree with each other. And so it was like, well, I would kind of just like to have like a different
yeah,
perspective,
yeah,
just for my own learning and
yeah,
my curiosity.
yeah,
So I try to find people that I'm like, oh, I know I've heard about this subject. I don't know very much about it. Kind of like what you do. You're like, I don't know about something. I'm gonna talk to somebody about it.
yeah,
Um, and it's been so great. Everybody is, so knowledgeable and so warm. And if anything, I think talking to a lot of different people, just about anything really,
yeah,
it gives you a larger sense of like, don't listen to the news, don't listen to people telling you everybody else is bad or evil. Like
yeah.
most people are like trying to get by,
Trying to get by.
trying to get by. They do care a lot about themselves, their family, and their communities. They care about you. Like,
Mm,
so I think that's sort of a lot what I get from doing the podcast.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I just get to like listen to people tell me stories. I get the opportunity to go to people like, hey, I would really like to talk to you.
Yeah, it's really wonderful, isn't it? I think it's such
Yes.
a beautiful medium. Like this
Yeah.
would never be possible
Mm-mm.
in any other age. Like we're
Yes.
very specific time with that. And I think it's kind of, I guess, harnessing the internet for a really good purpose that
Yeah.
very often we kind of passively get consumed by it. And now we get to channel it for something. It sounds a bit like the
Yeah.
magic you described.
Yes, exactly. That's
Be
a
more
good point.
intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it myself. I think um, as you say, just to be able to approach people and kind of learn and listen. And sometimes, I've spoken to some family members on this thing as well. And I realized, wow, I never had this conversation with you. And now because it's in this format, it kind of is more conducive to that end. And so uh, yeah, it's deeply meaningful and transformative, I would say.
I agree.
Yeah. There's so many things that I'm curious about to ask you. I guess a topic that's come up a lot in my podcast that I'm really not able to even begin to wrap my head around is kind of different beings. Maybe some of the
Hmm.
ones that you've described that your husband has been in contact with,
Yeah.
that kind of I've had some experiences with, but I've not been able to place it because I don't have a framework for them at all.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so I have like a largely Christian upbringing and a worldview like that where
Yeah.
there's some conception of angels.
Right.
and demons, perhaps. But
Hmm.
I feel that it falls a bit short in terms of kind of specifying or really understanding all of that, if you know what I
Hmm.
mean. So, do you
Yeah.
maybe have some thoughts on it to
Ooh,
enlighten?
yes. Oh gosh, so many things. Well, I'll talk about angels because I think I've definitely worked like been work with angels, not
Yeah.
like in sort of like the magical sense of like doing a Nokian or anything like that. It's just they appear like they, and
Mm,
they appear to regular people all the
mm,
time.
mm.
Um, who aren't doing magic. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so you contemplate that as like, well, they exist, right? And so, and the experiences my husband has had as well. So our current understanding, always subject to change,
Yes, great. That's good.
is they are definitely sort of helpers of the universe. And they sort of, they can see and change things in space and time, and they can see all things all at once. And that's why when you see those really, people make fun of those like biblical images of angels where they have
Yeah,
all the
the
eyes,
eyes
right?
around them. Yeah, yeah.
Eyes everywhere. It's because they can see through time and all the
Mm,
dimensions, right?
mm.
And then as a little tiny human being, we only have one pair of eyes. Well, one pair of physical eyes, right?
Yes, yes.
But we have our psychic eye. But yeah, so if imagine a being that can do that, and they can also, they can change time, right? Like a lot of the images that have come to my husband and things that I have also seen is around clocks,
Mm,
right? The
mm,
machinery
mm,
is
mm,
kind of like a clock.
mm.
And so, when you think about asking an angel, like, hey, we need to change things, the angel is like, or I need this particular thing to happen. Angel is probably like, okay, but realize I gotta like
Yeah,
literally gotta redo the universe.
yeah,
And that's fine. That's what they do.
yeah.
Um, so I think that they are connected. They are our connection between whatever,
Yes.
source, God, or whatever. They are the in between, right? But they actually handle like the machinations of the universe, and you can get in touch with them. Now, as far as like the individual beings that get in touch with you, my current thinking on this is as a human being, we put things in containers, right? We are a container.
Mm,
We are a container of spirit.
mm.
And what I mean by that is like, if you have listened to, oh gosh, what is I'm forgetting his name,
Yeah.
but like fairy, like a being like a fairy, let's say
Yes. Perfect.
fairies in Ireland, the jinn in the Arabic culture.
Yes.
In my mom is from the Philippines. They call them the not the Anito, the duende,
Uh-huh.
right? This being shows up. This
Everywhere.
type of being shows up everywhere. They just have like a different container,
Uh,
right?
Makes
And
sense.
my current thinking about this is for those beings, they show up that way for that particular populace. Let's say in Ireland,
Yes.
in Arabia, in the Philippines, they show up that way because that's the container they have been given as a community.
Mm,
As an individual, you also create containers.
yes.
And it means like you create a container or like a interface for spirit to come down into so you can interface with it. And I think that's what's happening.
Yeah,
That's the weird thing.
that makes
But
perfect.
like, yeah. So the things that have showed up for you is because you, in your own experience, for you to understand what is, communicating with you, it'll show up in a specific container.
Mm, yeah,
On a,
that makes perfect sense. Also, with kind of my experience of it, I guess that
yeah.
felt like kind of very loving and guiding. I think.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I would be perfectly happy with the conclusion that they could be angels.
Yeah.
But I definitely had like two beings that kind of showed up in a shape that wasn't I was comfortable with, kind of like made up of stars or something.
Yeah.
And they kind of guided me toward a much better outlook and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that helps me. It actually makes a lot of sense. And then I think there's kind of it feels like there's many more types of beings that I'm not really fully able to classify. So do you think
Mm-hmm.
that um, there's this category of beings that we can call angels that perhaps other cultures call different by different names,
Mm-hmm.
and
So
that's kind of what's out there, or do you think there's also other types of beings that go by even different names, maybe even within the same culture. You mentioned fairies, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think angels, I just think they are part, whether or not you're Christian, however you want to
Yeah.
call them,
Yes.
they are definitely beings, I think, that are involved in the machinations of the universe, and they're
Mm.
between us as human beings living our human experience and whatever that force is up there.
Yeah.
It is the things that connect with us. And, I've heard, especially with archangels, I feel like the archangels in particular, they have not been humans. I don't think they've ever been humans ever.
Uh, so what
So they,
differentiates them from normal angels? Sorry to interrupt.
oh yeah, no, of course. I just think that they are definitely, if you think of, and this is such a terrible example because I hate corporations, but like if you think of like the CEO as God, right?
Yeah.
And then you have maybe the C-level management.
Yeah.
So
I
you
get
have,
you. Okay.
yeah, so C-level management is the archangels, but they have never, let's say all the C-level management has never had to like pay for their own
Yeah.
college,
Yeah.
go get an actual job. They don't understand what the folks underneath them
Yeah.
go through, but they're there to help and connect you with like the CEO.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That's
Okay.
how I see them. But of course, they're not like a corporation where they think they're better than you. Like angelic forces are definitely there to help you connect, right? That's what they care about. They want you to have that connection.
Mm.
Um, and if you're like, hey, I need that connection, and I also need to get my car fixed. You're like, can you help me with that?
Yeah.
They're like, sure, but we might have our lower level management angels come assist you with that.
I see. Okay.
And I do think some of those angels, maybe, like, again, these things, my cosmology is subject to change, but the sort of lower, I do think some of those actually lived human lives, and I do
Mm.
consider them angelic, right?
Yes.
So they the C-level angels are like, we're going to put you in touch with these middle management angels
Yeah.
because they understand what you're going through,
Yeah.
and but they can also help. So it's like a more direct conversation. And so the beings you saw, like I believe whatever you felt they were, or is what they were.
Mm.
It's our brains always trying to like
Yeah.
put a lot of stuff around it, but whatever
Yeah.
you initially was like, it's this, then it's that.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really give it a name because I didn't fully understand what's going on. And it was like beyond my paradigm so hard that I was kind of
Yeah.
just in awe, I guess, and
Hmm.
deep appreciation.
Yeah.
But I would give it a loving name for
Yeah.
sure. Um,
Yeah.
where do kind of then gods fit into
Oh gosh.
this story about the angels and the archangels and God, and then yeah, what are gods then?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a good question. So, we talked about the Egyptian gods. We'll just use
Yeah.
those in it. A lot of people are familiar with that. I think similarly to how I was kind of framing like fairies or jinn or any of those things, I think as a culture, we put a lot of energy around um, things like in Egypt, there was like a lot of focus around the sun,
Yeah.
the land, the fertile land,
Yeah.
certain energies. And for us as human beings, whether you like it or not, we interface way better with something that looks like us.
Yes.
It
That's
operates like us,
that makes sense.
Yeah. Even our animals, right? Which they're animals, but we treat them, our pets and things, we treat them
Yes.
like as if they're people because they are
Put
people.
put sweaters on them and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay.
So Egypt is such a wonderful example because my experience, like my personal sort of experience with like the Egyptian gods, like they love humans. They
Mm.
love them, and they will reach out and they will help you if you reach out to them. So, there's the Egyptian god Osiris, who is, you know, gosh, I'm forgetting, you probably know better
Yeah.
what his realm is.
He's like the god
Um,
of the underworld, I guess. Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And then and his wife Isis, who is
Hmm.
like in the Western sense is kind of connected to like maybe Venus energy. So
Yes.
like sort of that
Yeah.
Um, so it's basically again sort of the those big aspects of what makes humans human, but in like a form that we can interface with. So whether it be like a planet, whether it be like Isis or Venus, it's something that is an energy that exists but wants a container. And if we like observe it and give energy to it, it starts to have its own
That
personality and starts
yeah,
interacting, is what I am experienced
that
with
makes
that.
perfect sense.
Yeah.
Also, kind of with the Egyptian conception of it, they were like, well, if you kind of stop giving energy to the gods, there's this
Yeah.
text I think about that by an Egyptian priest maybe who was saying that one day the gods will leave this land and then will not worship. Yeah, I think it's kind of related to that. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that people are kind of able to revive that
Mm-hmm.
and then give it body and
Yeah.
give the gods
Yeah.
body.
Yeah. And I think those aspects and qualities of each of the gods, like kind of exactly what you're saying, is like if we don't acknowledge those things, they go away or they operate on their own accord.
Yeah,
They kind of go do their own thing.
yeah,
But if we kind of like interface with it and like be with it, and then I think it has like it's willing to work with you. Just like any, like again, if you treat it like a human being, the more you like, hang out with somebody, you kind of get each other's vibe, you know, you're like simpatico. And I
yeah,
think as a culture, Egypt was amazing because their religion was literally part of their everyday lived experience. Like
absolutely.
just like it was very integrated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no kind of like separation. There were no atheists in Egypt, they weren't,
Yeah.
doesn't exist. There's no way to be that because it's like it's your whole meaning making machinery. There's nothing outside of the religious frame, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, well, I will say I'm kind of nearing the end of my time, but
Yeah.
I had a very long day. I kind of work all day and then gym and then came here, and it's really refreshing to kind of talk to you and pick
Oh
your brain
yeah.
on a lot of stuff, which I'm happy to do again. And I think we'll speak in about 2 weeks or so. At least I tried to get on your Calendly. I don't know if you saw that,
Yes.
but
Very looking forward to it.
that's super exciting and. I'm sure I'll have many more questions, but I think I'm also going to be able to explore your channel more and kind of see more of your work. And for now, I just kind of like to say thank you for
Yeah.
doing this. And yeah, I have so much stuff to kind of chew on, work with, and kind of do something with. So that's super, and I'm really really grateful to you, Merrily. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucas. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a good day.
You too.